Last week, I looked at Matthew chapter 18, where Jesus tells Peter, you must forgive 70 times 7 times. Now, Jesus follows up that surprising and shocking instruction with a parable that may help us to understand why we would do this. Once upon a time, there was a king. And the king had many servants and slaves. And one day the king was settling accounts and figuring out how much each of his people owed him. And he discovered that he had a slave who owed him an absolutely extravagant amount of money. And so he called that slave to him and said, this is how much money you owe me, and I want you to pay me back. And the slave, in panic and terror, knowing that he has no way of returning this money, prostrates himself on the floor and begs the king, please, my lord, give me more time and I will pay you back. And the king, what an extraordinary king. He looks at the slave and he says, very well, you don't have to pay me back at all. Which is really extraordinary because the slave didn't ask to be forgiven the debt. He said he was willing to pay it if he had more time. But the king looks at him and says, nope, you don't need to pay at all. So in great joy and rejoicing, the slave goes out, and as he's walking down the street, he comes across a fellow slave who owes him a few dollars. And he says to him, you owe me money and I want it back now. And the other slave says, I can't, I don't have it right now. Please give me more time and I will get you your money. And Jesus says that the first slave actually took the second one by the throat and began to choke him, saying, give me my money back now. And then, when the other slave could not repay him, had him thrown into prison until he could pay the debt. The word gets back to the king of how his slave has behaved. And he brings the slave to him and he says, I forgave you an enormous debt, and you could not be bothered to forgive a small debt and be merciful in a small way. To prison with you. You have not been merciful, therefore you will not receive mercy either. Why must we be merciful with one another? Because the debts that others owe us are so small compared to the debt that we owe God. And because God has been so merciful to us in great ways, how could we not, in small ways, be merciful to one another? Blessed are the merciful, for they shall receive mercy.